It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas over here. Hello, welcome back to Cindy's Library. I am Cindy. Thank you for joining me here today. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, as you can see. But first, we have some other matters to take care of. One, a tiny book haul, and two, we need to discuss what I read for November. So let's get to it. So my tiny book haul. I found a collector's library edition of Silas Marner. Not quite the same version as some of the others I've been collecting, but that's okay. It's tiny and cute, and I love the story, so I'm glad to have it. And I got A Daughter of the Land by Jane Stratton Porter. Haven't read this yet, but Jane Stratton Porter, I know. So glad I found these. So let's see. What did I read for the month of November? I read a lot of different things. It's nonfiction November, and I actually did read some nonfiction. I actually completed Hugh Nibley Observed. Now, this is a book about Hugh Nibley, essays written primarily by those who knew him, colleagues, remarks from his children or his funeral, things like that. Now, who is Hugh Nibley, you might ask? Hugh Nibley, he basically lived during the 20th century, very roughly speaking. Was born early in that and died before it quite finished, I think, or just a couple of years after. Anyway, he was a prominent member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not because of any particular ecclesiastical office that he held. As far as that goes, he was a pretty ordinary lay member who fulfilled whatever callings he was given, often gospel doctrine teacher, which would have been perfect for him. But he was rather brilliant. He knew, had a working knowledge, if not fluency, in like 30 languages, and not just modern languages too, like German and French and Icelandic and Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, going into ancient versions of those, going into Egyptian, including Coptic, and probably uh, other dead languages that only a very specific scholar would have even heard of, let alone known how to read. He was a polylinguist, a polymath, interested in everything, and uh, actually served in World War II, and after that, spent the rest of his career at BYU, Brigham Young University, just being himself, writing about whatever he was studying at the moment and teaching whatever he was studying about the moment. And most people couldn't keep up with him, but that was okay. It was an experience. In fact, that is what a lot of these essays were, is people describing their experiences with Hugh, either as a colleague, having had him as a student. So, very, very interesting guy. What I find amazing is not only was he that brilliant, but he was equally uh, faithful to his beliefs as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He never found a conflict between the two. So, very inspiring for me as a person of faith who also has at least a little bit of interest in academic subjects. So, very interesting, quite the character. we're talking about the type of guy who would wear uh, mismatched socks and a crumpled hat and a tweed jacket that he got from DI to lecture in. So very much the absent-minded professor. Very much enjoyed that. I'm glad I finally finished it. I also read Beowulf and the North Before the Vikings by Tom Shippey. Now, in this little book, Tom Shippey makes the argument that one of the best sources that we have for what the ancient world was like before the Vikings, at least in the northwestern part of Europe, is Beowulf. How can that be, you might ask, given that Tolkien spent an entire lecture, The Monsters and the Critics, criticizing the critics of his time for not looking at Beowulf as literature, which is very true. They were not looking at Beowulf as literature, and as an epic poem. That is probably a misstep. That's a fair characterization. However, he also never said don't look at the poem in any other way, including everything related to the historical. And it's like I said, it seems to be the clearest account of that time, and everything that's not the monsters part seems to correlate very well with what we do know of the North. As for what was going on before the Vikings, well, to start off with, there were, well, it wouldn't be right to say there were always Vikings, but there were Vikings when the Romans were in Britain. I mean, it wasn't just the local Celts and the northern Picts that the Romans were having to deal with. They had basically lighthouses and warning beacons all along the coast to warn of uh, northern raiders from the Scandinavian areas. And after the Romans left Britain, it got worse for a while there. But after that, basically, a number of major pre-Viking families uh, fought each other and imploded and decimated each other, which is why we have between 2 and 3 centuries of relative peace with no Viking raids until the 1800s, basically, several centuries later. And of course, by that time, they weren't used to that anymore, and it caused a lot of problems. But the Northmen were not that different from Roman times to Anglo-Saxon times till the Viking raids began again in earnest. So, quite interesting book if you're interested in that subject. Might be worth taking a look at. Let's see, what else? Oh, the other book that I read for nonfiction November was The Completion of C.S. Lewis by Harry Lee Poe. From War to Joy, 1945 to 1963. This is the third of 3 volumes. We had the beginning of C.S. Lewis, or no, becoming C.S. Lewis, and the making of C.S. Lewis, which gets us to 1945, at which point Lewis was a prominent tutor and lecturer at Oxford. He had done some important scholarly work, and was even more well known for his apologetic books and radio talks during the war. What could he possibly do with the rest of his life? Well, as it turns out, plenty. These were very significant for C.S. Lewis, and I'm not saying the earlier years weren't, but these were very significant years for C.S. Lewis. A lot of important things happened. Mrs. Morris, with whom he lived with from basically when he returned from World War One to her death in the early 1950s, she passed away after some difficult times, especially there towards the end. Got passed over for promotion at Oxford. He ended up leaving Oxford and going to Cambridge. He met Joy Davidson, an American New York brash Jewish to atheist to Christian convert. 2 sons, the last person you would have thought that a bachelor like him, a confirmed bachelor, would marry if he would ever marry, but he ended up marrying her. And that rather changed his life. And as for his writing, he still had some of his most significant work still to come, including all the Chronicles of Narnia, Surprised by Joy, which ironically is not a reference to Joy Davidson, and perhaps his best work, Till We Have Faces, along with continuing numerous scholarly and apologetic adjacent writings, and being very involved in university life still. So quite enjoyable. This is a very, very readable set. So as far as that goes, I can definitely recommend it. And let's see, those are not the only things that I read. I also finished Miss Reed, Storm in the Village. Now, for back to Fairacre again with Miss Reed, the beloved teacher there. And this time we have a bit of a tempest in a teapot. Let's see. There is Miss Jackson, the new teacher. There's some interesting things, to say the least, going on with her. But beyond that, the biggest thing is Farmer Miller's 100-acre field is slated for real estate development. They want to build a village there to house people from the city working in factories, basically. Which, on one level, you can't really blame them. They have to be put somewhere. They're overcrowded at the villages closer to the city where they currently are, and it would bring some improvements. Do the people of Fairacre want these improvements at the cost of this new village? No, they don't. So we get all the drama of waiting to hear how this is going to end up for the people of Fairacre. And of course, Miss Reed is quite in the middle of things, since the school would be affected as well. Seems to be decided that they can keep the school, but it would only be the junior half that would be kept, the youngest children. The rest would be bussed off to the new school or possibly to another village. And that's worrisome for Miss Reed and worrisome for a lot of her students' parents. So Just love visiting Fairacre. I also finished, finally, the next Lord Peter Wimsey mystery, 5 Red Herrings. So, uh, Lord Peter is visiting this village in Scotland, Kirkcudbright, and while he is there, a painter named Sandy Campbell. Well, at first it looks like an accident. He certainly was painting close enough to the edge of a dangerous area that he could have certainly fallen down and died that way. But Lord Peter finds some proof that it wasn't an accident, it was murder. And given that it was murder, after going through all of the evidence, Lord Peter comes up with 6 potential main suspects, each of whom is an artist themselves, each of whom had great reason to dislike, if not actively hate, Mr. Campbell. And so all of them have motive, and some of them seem to have a pretty good alibi at first. But the more Peter Wimsey looks into it, maybe not so much. Might very well be the most traditional mysteries Dorothy Sayers has written, but it's still quite enjoyable. Love her style as always. Let's see, and I also finally finished Island Magic by Elizabeth Goudge. Now, this is basically the story of the Dufrock family. You have Rachel and Andre, who live at Bone Repos, their farm, on Grimsony. Why do they live on this farm? Because things are very complicated with Andre's father, the children's grandfather. And so, no, they want some space from him, even though he has offered a clerkship for Andre. But they aren't interested in that. Unfortunately, Andre's not much of a farmer, and they are running out of resources. As we start the book, we are introduced to Andre and his wife Rochelle and their 4 living daughters and sons. And we are also introduced to the fact that sadly they are, well, like I said, they're running out of resources. But Rochelle does not want to move to the town and live with her father-in-law any more than Andre wants to live with his father, really. And he doesn't see much choice, but she says, we've got 6 months left of resources. Let's use that up first. So he reluctantly agrees. Then they run on into, actually, he's a survivor from a shipwreck, Randolph. He's actually from Guernsey. He is very much a wanderer. Never thought he would come back, but now it's decades later from when he left, and he has no place left to go. And his life intertwines with the Dufrock family. So, lovely depiction of island culture, which is technically British, but it's also very much got its own twist, very much influenced with French. And it's just a beautiful depiction of this island. And I love all the members of this family. They're far from perfect, but just so real. Just love the way Elizabeth Goudge puts things. And I also read Dracula by Bram Stoker. I finished this on the last day of November, and it's not what you think. Uh, if you think of it in a modern way, then you probably won't get it or won't get the right idea. But if you think of it as a battle between good and evil, I think you'll come away with a greater understanding and one that's closer to how it was written. But anyway, yes, we are introduced to Dracula here and learn all about vampire lore. But more importantly, uh, we learn about the people with whose lives he intersects, starting with Jonathan Harker, a solicitor sent by his London firm all the way to visit with Dracula in Transylvania, in Romania, because Dracula has some interest in coming to England and to London. Of course, Jonathan Harker at first has no idea what's going on. And meanwhile, his fiancée, Mina, and her best friend, Lucy, and her three suitors, uh, Dr. Stewart and Quincy and Lord, what's his name? They all get entangled with Dracula too. Fortunately, Dr. Seward's old mentor, Van Helsing, does know something of what they are dealing with, but still, quite a gothic read, shall we say, and quite a suspenseful read, but a good way to end the month. Now, let's see, did I miss anything on my list? Um, oh yes. Uh, I read The Child Prince by Honor Raconteur, first in the Artifactor series. The Artifactor series features Sylvana, an Artifactor prodigy. Now, this is different from a wizard or a magician or a sorcerer or anything like unto these. Sylvana's magical ability is much less, but she specializes in actually making things, magical artifacts, potions, things other magic users use. In order to do this, you have to be highly, highly educated in any number of disciplines. Sylvana is also rather prickly and not a people person. She would rather just stay in her mountain most of the time with her pet mountain lion. But her friend drags her into national and even international politics when he points out that the council has been running the country basically for 10 years and in so doing is ruining the country. So, why is this book called The Child Prince? Well, part of the reason why the council has been in charge for the past 10 years was the prince was cursed. It was a curse to make him de-age. He was 11 when he was hit with it. He ended up at 8 years old when the court magician was able to put him under stasis. And he has stayed 8 years old ever since. And the council has locked him in his room, basically. So, that is the first step to unraveling things. And there's also some things going on with the king, but I can't say anything else without really spoiling too much. But can't say necessarily that it's a great story, but it's sure a fun one with some fun characters. So glad I read it. I also read Lily of the Valley by Sarah Eden. Now, this is book 2 of the Gents. Who were the Gents? They were a group of friends in the Georgian era. And so the most prominent one, well, maybe not the most prominent one, but the one who was featured in book 1 was the one we never actually see in the Jonquil books, but he was their father. And so it's very, very fun to get to see him and all of his friends. In this case, his friends includes Kester, who is an introvert, is sort of dragged into being friends with the others, whether he likes it or not. And so he's also a bit of an inventor, I guess you could say. Wants to join the Royal Society, but hasn't succeeded in convincing them he's a worthy member yet. Meantime, an attractive young lady with her family moves into a nearby estate. They are the noble rich from the merchant class, now having enough money to buy an estate. Now, Kester and the gents don't mind this. Of course, some people in society do. And our fair young heroine has some secrets of her own. Specifically, I think it was in an accident. Her left hand was severely damaged and was even becoming septic, so it had to be cut off. Of course, that's something she is not eager to spread around. But she too, because of that, has some interest in scientific pursuits. Now, if she could only get Kester to unthaw a little bit, shall we say. Of course, they are both dealing with their issues, and not just those, but anyway, that is what I read in the month of November. So, I'd love to hear what you read in the month of November. If you've read any of the same books I did, I'd love to hear what you thought. Until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy, and as always, happy reading!